on the opioid
Yep.
information, and the information that bath salts is a bigger issue in Claremont than
Unfortunately.
opioids. And that's something that if
I
you,
did not realize that.
something that I would encourage the public to look at the council packet and actually see all that information. Very, very thorough, strong report that kind of takes some of the misconceptions away and actually shows you what the problem is really like. So thank you for that.
Yeah, the big trouble with bath salts, from my understanding, is that every couple of months, the people that supply these chemicals change them just slightly to keep them legal. It's a constant chase between enforcement and updating of the chemicals to make sure that, you know, we try to make them illegal and they change them slightly so that they're outside of that legal zone, and then we have to change it again so that the new chemicals are illegal. It's going to be a cat and mouse game with some of these future drugs.
Wow. I do have a question with regard to the SSP. I know you're working on trying to find a solution, but do you have any timeline? And the reason why I ask this is because the students had gone through the effort of coordinating within the city administration. We didn't realize that this location would be in violation of the distance from a school as per state law. But when you go through the data that was included in our packet about the opioids, there's an increase in presentations at the ER. And since they were doing the needle exchange plus giving out Narcan, I'm assuming that that may have some impact on that number, the increase of people presenting at the ER with overdoses. So I guess what I'm asking is, I would hope that we are going to find a solution sooner rather than later with the needle exchange program. And they were shut down in the end of October, I believe, and here it is, we're going into the second half of December. So I'd like to see what the solution's going to be, and I don't know how the rest of the council feels about that, but I mean, I think it's part of the formula for dealing with opioids in a community. Councilor Toll?
I've actually had citizens asking me what the solution has been, because they're finding needles on playgrounds and walking down the streets, and I've had 3 citizens come to me and ask me if we are working on the solution, so we need to find the solution.
I agree. I wish I could provide greater detail on the timeline tonight. I cannot. I can tell you that we are working very diligently on it. Our planning department is reviewing all of the zoning legalities. I have a meeting with Peter Wright this Friday, so that will definitely be a topic during our meeting. I know that Valley Regional is working on this issue. So I hope in January I will be able to provide the council with more specific information.
That's terrific.
So from a council perspective, are we considering this a priority?
I would think so.
Yes, a public health safety priority?
Yes.
Okay,
Madam Mayor, could I make one comment?
yes.
Just to Councilor Toll's comment, the lack of the needle exchange program is, in my opinion, from my experience, not necessarily the reason why people are finding needles on the street. Drug abuse has been a problem for many, many years, and as a former Claremont police officer, I can say, without speaking, I don't want to speak in place of the chief, but we were always called for needles found on the side of the road, needles found in neighborhoods. So the lack of the exchange program, I wouldn't say is going to be a major reason why people are finding the needles. Just I think it's important for the community to realize that these things will be found whether you have a needle exchange program or not. But
And I think, to your point, John, is that it came out that we didn't have one
Right.
because of certain circumstances.
Absolutely.
And they've made a notation, mental notation, and now they're seeing, these things probably for the first time, and it rings a bell. But
We know
we
they
need
had
to do
an,
our due diligence and come up with an answer.
And I'm certainly not, I'm not saying that that is not an important point. I just think the public needs to be educated on the fact that there has been drug abuse for many, many years, and everywhere.
Yeah.
Not just Claremont, and needles are one of those things that we've found for years, so.
Thank you.
let's not forget, there's another component to this needle exchange program with, in addition to drugs, and that was the medical students' concern about stopping the spread of diseases
Harm
such as HIV and
Right.
hepatitis B. And yes, Mr. McNutt.
I just wanted to also say that the police department has a sharps container that's publicly available. I'm going to go through and catalog all of the municipal entities as well as supportive agencies in Claremont that have sharps containers, and we're going to put that information on the website so that if somebody does want to responsibly dispose of a needle, they will know where to put it safely.
That's good. That's really good.
Yes, Counselor Kowalski.
So is Narcan still being distributed at this location?
To the best of my knowledge, they were shut down, so I don't think that's being done either.
Well, the
Which
needle
location?
At the soup kitchen.
So the needle exchange portion was shut down, but I'm wondering about the Narcan side of things.
I don't necessarily have any information. I can look that up. I don't think any of the Project 439 activities are continuing at the soup kitchen, but I would have to verify that.
Okay, Counselor Temple?
Obviously, I was one of the ones that raised a little bit of concern about the exchange program, and it wasn't my concern so much that we were doing it, it was the location and the way it was laid out to us. And I hope as the councils go forward in the future, if it is a priority, that there's more public vetting about location and those sorts of things. And then, I had shared, I don't usually get a lot of phone calls, and you got 3, or you heard from 3 people, but I did hear from somebody that was concerned about the posting up on a social media site the fact that Narcan is now available someplace else in the city. And I don't know the place because I've not been there, but they linked it to our community center. And I said, I don't think we're doing Narcan at the community center. But somewhere in town, I think it's either this Friday or next Friday. The way I understood it from social media, so I don't have
Yeah.
consider the source, is that there's free Narcan training for,
I did see that.
and I just
Can't
wondered
remember.
if we're raising this to a level of extreme importance, how does the school feel about Narcan training? Are we going to see Narcan in lunch buckets? The questions just open up a big mushroom. So I'm hoping that going forward, the city as a whole can deal with this, and maybe it's meeting with the hospital administrator or the school superintendent or somebody, law enforcement, because I'd hate to see, I know nothing about the training, so maybe it's very simple and it's a no-brainer, Bruce, but I got a sneaky feeling it's more than that.
It's a lot involved.
Our police and fire, I think, police and fire both are trained, and I'm looking at the chief here, but are trained in the use of Narcan, but I can't imagine a 14-year-old would be trained properly. But again, I'm glad we're raising this issue.
Did you want to speak to that, Chief Chase?
I would just let the council know, we do not, my officers are not trained in the use of Narcan. We full-service EMS, so we send our, we call for EMS right away, so we usually are responding with them. We've been there for the administration of it. I know the fire department, I don't want to speak to them for them, but I believe they're trained as part of their EMT, EMS training, but we're not. We've talked about it. Some law enforcement, a couple years ago, they changed it so law enforcement could issue Narcan. We have not got on board with that, having a full-service EMS. It wasn't our priority at the time. I know the other agencies are. I believe the sheriffs are. It's something we've talked about, but we haven't enacted it yet.
Counselor Clark, I'm sorry.
No, I
Counselor
was just,
Campbell?
I appreciate that, because I think a lot of people feel that the police department is trained in Narcan, which is not the case. It sounds to me more like somehow our fire department is trained in Narcan.
Possibly. I'm not 100%
I know, you
sure
can't
on
speak
that.
for them, and
We're there. We help with the for the EMS. They're administering it though. But
Counselor Kowalski?
That's why I kind of wanted to have the larger, and I asked the question about, Primex and looking at policies in-house, because that's something that I have to go through training every year to maintain certification. The last two that I've gone through are encountering, it's people in the police department that go in the front door first and come in contact with some sort of substance, fentanyl, but not having access between themselves to administer. So there's two separate issues. One would be the policy of the police department, and one would be protecting the employees of the city of Claremont. So that's why I really wanted to look at what we do with Narcan and our response procedures for first responders. So Springfield, Vermont has a very in-depth policy as far as even going into medical calls with eye protection, pull-on disposable sleeves, and they have doses of Narcan for themselves. So I just think that's an important thing before something tragic happens to a first responder.
It's pretty scary.
Okay. Counselor Simonds?
To go back to your original question on as far as the times that Narcan is distributed, I can't speak for what goes on in the city. I mean, that would be for the manager to say, but the Sullivan County Public Health Network does training around the county where they go out and they receive the Narcan through the state. The Public Health Network will go out and do training sessions, and they advertise it. So I haven't seen the latest advertisement for when they're doing it, but if there is something that says it's coming, it's possibly through the county. But as far as the law enforcement, my agency and all the deputies with the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office are certified to administer Narcan. But we did it primarily because we are contracted with 2 towns within the county for law enforcement services. And when you're out in Unity and Leominster and you respond to an overdose, the potential of having an ambulance there or an EMT there before the police officer is generally, the officer's going to be there first in most cases. And we wanted the opportunity to be able to try to save a life while we're waiting for the ambulance to get there. So it's not a one-size-fits-all for every police department.
Yeah.
It's actually a very hot-button issue with police chiefs, in that a lot of officers, when you bring somebody out of an opioid overdose, become violent.
Yeah.
And the officer needs to at times be able to protect the EMTs.
Right.
And the family's getting upset, and the officer's got his back turned. While they're administering this to the person, and the person becomes violent, now you've got one officer in a house without an EMT, without a backup officer. So it is there's an argument on both sides as to whether it's good for police officers to carry it.
So some of that stuff that you talked about was mentioned in the packet material we got on opioids, and so I think what we're looking for after the discussion, Mr. McNutt, is at some point in January, February, we need to have a more comprehensive look at how we, as a city, are going to address this issue comprehensively, and what the components are going to be to effectively address it. And we'll probably be looking at, I don't know what policies exist, but from a city council perspective, what's our position on all of this? So we'll be investigating that as well. Assistant Mayor Dameron?
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, picking up on Councilor Temple's comments, that I would urge, and as much as possible, the opioid situation is a priority certainly for us and as a city, but I would like to see us be presented as part of a comprehensive look with a schedule of what city facilities, if any, would be used for Narcan training or otherwise. I'd like to know all of that beforehand as opposed to after the fact, so that we know how to address citizen concerns that, yes, we agreed or we have been told.
Councilor Pope?
I've been hearing that there's going to be some state resources through the governor's office and legislature. Also, if we can get an update as to what those resources would be and what this community might
I just read something
receive.
from NH.
That would also be very good for our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. City manager, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to reassure the public that there's not any Narcan training happening at the community center. This is happening at the Hope for Recovery Center. I mean, there may have been some type of misinformation or misinterpretation by some folks on social media, but it's clearly advertised at the Hope for Recovery Center through the New Hampshire Public Health Network, as the
So I
sheriff
think,
mentioned.
I think the confusion is that sometimes they refer to themselves as a community center as well.
Yeah, right.
And that's probably where the
Yeah,
confusion
that's
started.
probably what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would ask, because we have a very packed agenda with lots of people here for various parts of the agenda, if we could save any other questions or comments about the city manager's report or departmental reports until later on in the evening, that would be most helpful. Is that okay with the board and with the council? Okay, next thing on our agenda is appointments to boards and committees, and that starts on page 1.